No Driving Gloves were a combination of gearheads. John the Instigator, Derek the Conservator, Will the Builder, Sean the Racer, and maybe a guest invite you to listen while they sit down, have a drink, and discuss cars. And subscribe to the podcast at No Driving Gloves. Time now for the ride. Hey, Mr. Derek, what's happening tonight?
Not a lot, John. How are you doing?
Oh, kind of busy as snot. I wish some things were, well, I would say I wish some things are car-related, but some things are car-related. I'm still contemplating over that CRX I talked about last week. I found out it's a Gen 2 car. It's a DX. It's an automatic. It runs. It drives. Unfortunately, the doors are taken off of it. Half the interior is stripped out of it. The front fenders are off. The nose is off. The radiator's out. The core support's out. And I don't have an indoor place to put it, and I don't really want to devote a weekend to putting it back together, and I don't have a weekend in my sights that I could put, really take off to put it back together. So I'm in a little dilemma on it. I really don't want an automatic DRX or automatic DX CRX. It's probably the least desirable one in my book. But it would be having a CRX, and I could knock around in it for a while, and I'm sure I could sell it for, $1,000, $1,500 and move on up in the CRX realms.
I mean, I was gonna say it was all sounding good with free being the cost until you said automatic transmission, and then it was like,
Well, see, I am
pay me to take it.
I have become one of the proponents of automatic transmissions. I can agree with them. I can understand their use. I honestly think they're a superior transmission to a manual in the most modern. A CRX DX with an automatic, no, that's a horrible thing. An automatic, anything from 1985 is a horrible car. But the way automatics are now today, with the way they shift and things like that, I think they're superior. And I mean, if
I agree. Yeah, I was just my thing is, vintage cars, classic cars, whatever realm you want to put them in, I prefer them to be stick shift. It's just a little more fun.
Well, I think it goes back to being a toy. Of course, I'm not going to race it, so I'm good with that. Having the manual is, fun because it's a toy, and to me, that's enjoying it. But I also find as I'm getting older and I encounter more and more traffic, I get a little impatient. That's originally how No Driving Gloves, the name, was created. I had created the name about 2005, 2006 for a blog, and it was going to be me bitching about the things automotive that irritated me, whether it was traffic or the way people were parking, or, the idiot driver that did this, or the manufacturer that did something stupid like added fender flares to a Challenger and called it a wide body. I just don't. Ralph, if you come on the show, you can explain that thinking. But
oh, ouch. Well, the good thing though is that what you've just covered and what you've just said in the nearly 4 years we've been doing this podcast, we've covered most of that. I mean, we've complained about traffic, we've complained about people's driving, we've complained about all of that on the show, and we can continue to for the next however many years this goes on. But I will back up and say the manual transmission to me in older cars, and I think we've talked about this on the show. I'm almost sure we've talked about it on the show before. It is the true experience of driving an automobile, having to work a throttle, a clutch, and a brake, and shift gears, do everything almost mechanically. To me is the driving experience. And it's even better when you have an early car where you have to adjust the spark and throttle and everything as you're going to keep the car from just dying on the side of the road.
I'll go with you. There is an enjoyment with that. When I was back at Barber's and we had acquired 2 or 3 Model Ts within a couple of weeks, and we had that one with all the what was Louis Chevrolet's company that built high performance parts for Model Ts. I want to say Ford.
Frontneck?
Huh?
Frontneck?
Yeah. I mean, we had one that had every front neck part on it, including the badges and that. And that sucker was fun. For a T, I mean, it moved. Probably wasn't doing more than 40 at best. You're still doing wood and spoke wheels and that. But it was a fun. It was actually a Model T pickup, but it was actually a fun roadster pickup to drive around, and
it was a nice truck. I remember seeing it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed playing with that one, and then of course we had a standard one that we had acquired, and then of course we had the 15 Touring that had been there for years, and then actually I think when I left they had 4 Ts because then they had acquired a what do you call the stupid wooden things that were like a station wagon bus? I can't think of the term.
Woody?
It's a
depot hack?
Yeah, depot hack. They bought the depot hack that I think Dan Gurney owned. No, Carroll Shelby owned it. It was actually out of the Shelby collection. And that was one of those things that just because somebody owns it, it might not be as what you think it is. No, I'm always fearful of buying a museum car because usually they're not run or properly cared for. Yeah, it's out of a museum. It sounds cool, but buyer beware.
Not sure how to. I'm never sure how to react to that because my philosophy on museum cars is to take care of them a lot differently than that. So,
yeah, but I'm gonna say I don't want to insult your museum, but there's always a car or two in a museum, no matter what, that's never going to get run, that's never going to get potentially treated right, wasn't necessarily put up right. While you pay tons of attention to everything in your collection, I can't remember, or don't know, actually, I can't, let alone remember, I never knew how many cars are in your collection, but even at the Barber Museum that uses cars and enjoys their cars, and they still have cars that have not run or moved in years, and they're just, you think they're going to be great cars. I mean, we had the 90 ZR1 with it's got 17 or 19 miles on it, and about 5 or 6 years ago we had one of the techs go completely through that car to make it run and drive and potentially sell it, and he did some stupid stuff like the fuel filler neck wasn't in place, so he ran some wood screws through the car to hold it in place, original GM pieces. So, I mean, there's a car that now, after they did all that work, they also did it with the 928 S4 that's there. They haven't moved. They haven't moved in 6 or 8 years. They're museum cars that are going to need to be gone through, and it's unfortunate. Yeah, everything should be driven and drove and operated and cared for, but I mean, even when I've owned 2 or 3 cars, it's sometimes hard to do that. When I owned 13, it was impossible to do that, and that's why I don't own 13 cars anymore. Financial needs and such aside, it was just work to keep them insured and registered, let alone everything else that goes with them.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to jump to, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the episode I called Fire, and fires and devastation. And this is just kind of a reminder thing because, unfortunately, the house that's about 6 or 7 doors down from us caught fire last night. The husband or the father was out in the garage, and he's got a couple of toy cars, and he was working on a car, and it backfired and caught his garage on fire. The house doesn't look like a total loss. I'm sure there's smoke damage in that, but it looks mainly confined to the garage. And I mean, the roof's still intact and things. Garage doors all melted to the ground, and the garage is pretty well charred. But I just wanted to put out a PSA or, a reminder to everybody when you're working in your garage, be sure to have that fire extinguisher nearby in that, because, it's an unfortunate thing. And, I don't know what's worse, a fire or a flood or whatever with your home, but it's just, and when it's something that, you created or the problem, I just, I feel bad for them. And as anti-compassionate as I am, my heart goes out to them, and, I've offered to help them in any way I can. So it's just a reminder about fire. What depressing news or exciting news is on your end? You were talking about maybe expanding your knowledge before the show.
So the family went up to, we took the kids back to Ohio this weekend and had some family birthday stuff going on the wife's side of the family. And then just kind of drove around as you do with kids to let them take their nap and in the car seats and the car moving. And one of the two kids tends to do pretty well with that. Usually he's out before we hit the end of a driveway. So that is awesome. But in our driving about, we stumbled through a small town in Northeast Ohio called Kinsman, Ohio. And turned out there was an old, actually, according to the gentleman that runs it, it is the oldest running general store in the state of Ohio. And he's added kind of like antique store stuff and books to the general store and bought up more of the buildings in the block around, and we just decided to go in and peruse. The kids woke up, and so we kind of popped in. And it's dangerous for me to go into a bookstore because I usually, especially an antique bookstore or a vintage bookstore, because I usually find the automotive section. And sure enough, they had a small automotive section. And as I think we've talked about on the show a few times before, there are some books, there's always good books out there. And whether, I have a reference library essentially of books that are specifically on maintenance, repair, the original, books from the early 1900s related to repairing early automobiles. But I also appreciate the automotive history side of things and really transportation history. So I wound up walking out with 5 new books. And fitting for this week, I think, is one that I read back in college. And I found a copy on the shelf, and I had to pick it up. It's called Taking the Wheel, Women and the Coming of the Motor Age. And of course, we're recording on March 9th, the day after International Women's Day. And fantastic book. I recall portions of it from reading it back in college, and just a book I wanted to pick up and read again and continue my obviously knowledge base of transportation history. So I always recommend a good automotive history book.
Were those brand new books, or obviously, I'm assuming they're vintage public, antique books or from a few years back, because I just can't see a publisher putting out things like that now, but you never know.
No, oh yeah, these are vintage books. Let's see. Okay, so this one, the Taking the Wheel, I just referenced, published by the New York Free Press, 1991. Actually, sorry, updated. Last update is 1992. And the other one I was showing John before the show, called Wagon, Chariot, and Carriage, Symbol and Status in the History of Transport. I'm going to guess this one's even older, John. I am wrong. Also 1992. But yeah, I could go dig through the rest of my books. There are books, like I said, that are published I've got them from the early 1900s all the way up. And these things, they're out of publication, and you're not going to find them on Kindle or on any of the, I don't know what other book apps are out there, but they're not popular, so they're not going to be out there.
And see, I wonder, and I don't know if you've ever explored, and I've gotten some things, and it's gotten much better since I think the last time I poked around, but the Google library, I'm finding I've found there's tremendous information out there because people have basically scanned books and uploaded them, and it'd be somebody like you who scans your book collection and puts them up there, and then they're available on Google Books until I guess some publisher comes and tells them, we don't like that, take it down. But you're dealing with books that are probably out of copyright at least, and probably haven't had the copyrights renewed because I know public domain, I think it's 1926 right now.
Yes.
But if it's from the 60s and it hasn't had the copyright renewed, I believe it's free game too. But don't take me on that. I'm not an attorney. Copyright and licensing is a whole ball of wax. And if you spend time on podcasting forums like me, fair use is not a law, it's a defense. You use it after you've been accused of plagiarizing or stealing.
And if you're in the nonprofit education world, it's a little easier to use that fair use defense. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess, a hobby. You know, one of my automotive hobbies is these books, and I feel like I can never read enough and never learn enough if I'm going to be who I am, be a historian in the automotive transportation realm. I know right now, I focus primarily on Corvette, but as I think we've talked about on this show, and I talk about regularly in any of the sessions or seminars or anything where I'm talking about Corvette, I guess I'm sometimes the person who shocks some people, because I'm the type of person that if we're going to talk about Corvette, we're going to talk about a lot of other cars, because any automobile has connections to almost every part of automotive history. The way automobiles have grown, the future of the automobile, the past of the automobile, they're all intertwined. There's no, Corvette is this little world over here and it's not impacted by anything. I'm sorry, it was impacted by the MGs, the British sports cars, the MG T series, the TA, TB, TC, TD. TD was a little late, so let's stay with the ABC. It's impacted by the Jaguars. It's impacted by the Crosley Hotshots, the Nash Healeys. And after it's in production, it's impacted by the Ford Thunderbird. It's impacted by the Dodge Viper when the Dodge Viper comes out. And, you cannot tell the whole story of a car without a lot of other transportation history involved and development of those things. So, that's just part of what I do. And I mean, you look back, and I think I've ranted about it on the show before, and I say rant because it's usually something boring that no one wants to listen to. But everything in the automotive realm right now, I mean, until we start major changes, a majority of it tracks back all the way to the Romans. So the way our roads are built, the way the width, the track of an automobile is the width of two horses side by side, which Romans built their roads around. It's all, to me, it's all part of this automotive world I live in.
Let me ask, because you said something there that was interesting, and I'm one who believes that, when you wake up in the morning, you should at least learn one new thing. Say, ironically, today, I taught somebody earlier today in a retail store something new, and then just this evening, probably an hour before we started to record, the youngest in the household was having trouble with controllers for his Oculus, and he couldn't, he put new batteries in it and put different batteries, and it wasn't working, and he put the battery in upside down. So, I was able to teach him, it's simple, but, keep in mind, he's 11 years old, that the little springy end is where the flat end of the battery goes, and 99% of the time, that's the way it's going to work. And, there's two little things I taught people today, which I enjoy. And two different individuals learned something today, so their days were productive. Was any of your decision to take, say, the job at the Corvette Museum was because of the ability it was going to give you to explore this unknown territory? Because, with the Crawfords, you worked with some modern automobiles, and with Henry Ford, you worked with some modern automobiles, but you've always been into the vintage stuff, and that's where you're at. Where jumping into Corvettes, you're not going too much before 1953, except when you're doing doing some of the comparisons on what created the Corvette. Was the ability to learn a whole new aspect of the automotive world? I mean, Corvettes, fiberglass, sports cars, General Motors, new or interesting. Was that thirst for knowledge any part of that decision, or is that just kind of a added benefit that happened that wasn't even considered when taking the job?
No, I think it was definitely a part of it. I mean, and I guess to me, taking a new job, there should be some challenges in that job. For me, it's a way to grow. If I took a job that I was like, this is going to be easy, why do I want that? Yeah, for me, that's just not what I look for. And, remember, John, and I know you know this about me, Corvette wasn't really that necessarily new, let's call it to me. I mean, I grew up around them with my dad restoring, he was GM fiberglass guy. He took all the classes at Tech Center so he could work on them at the body shops. And we restored them regularly at the shop at home for his, customers and friends. And I grew up in GM world. I mean, my dad was a GM, dealership employee, body man. So GM history, my mom's side of the family had GM employees in it, AC Delco side, things like that. So I knew that part of history. It was actually kind of, my dad razzed me more when I started working at Henry Ford Museum because of the Ford connection and had grown up more GM side of things. And then he kind of gave me a hard time when I went to the Corvette Museum. He said, you're finally coming back to GM, huh? But I think it was, and it was actually one of the things I talked about in my interview process of the, at the Corvette Museum when I was looking at the job. And, they had asked, one of the questions posed was what are the challenges you see or the difficulties you see behind us being a single make museum, not just a single mark. I mean, this isn't just Chevrolet. It's down to a single make of automobile. You're looking at Corvette. And I remember my answer to that, which was there isn't really a challenge or a difficulty in it. There's missed opportunities that I see at the museum. When I walked through and did my initial tours and things of the museum, there wasn't a single car that wasn't a Corvette on that museum floor. They were not telling the whole story. They weren't branching out into, Corvette didn't show up one day. Harley Earl didn't just walk into the styling studio and go, hey guys, I got this idea for an American sports car. It's called Corvette. Here's the design. Let's go. It wasn't just there.
I bet he walked.
That's not what Harley Earl would say. Harley Earl would say, that's how it happened.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's how it happened. And I can see him saying that. But I'm sure there were many nights sitting at home over, his, I'm going to say Mad Men, even though it's 20 years too late, having a scotch and reading stuff in the newspaper and the car magazines going, we need to make something like this, and then go in and take credit for walking in. But
you have to remember though, the whole most of Corvette was born at Watkins Glen when he was pacing the races and watching the races in the Buick LeSabre concept car. He was already headed for a sports car of some kind. He was already had it in mind. He was showing off the LeSabre at Watkins Glen. If I remember, I think he paced one or two of the races. I don't quote me on that. I don't remember. If you ever get a chance to see the Buick LeSabre in person or look it up online, look at the interior. The interior cockpit of the LeSabre, there are clear cues in the interior cockpit of the 1953-54 Corvettes. Very similar layouts, things, because that's the car Harley was sitting in when he started thinking about this. And he was watching MGs race by, TAs, TBs, all of them, all the ones that were being imported over. I mean, there were in those first Watkins Glen races. I mean, there were Mercedes brought over running, and Harley was sitting there going, we're missing the mark. There's a bunch of American kids running European sports cars around an American racetrack. What's wrong here? And that's where he starts birthing this idea of Corvette. That's one of the reasons that the first gallery you walk into at the Corvette Museum, yes, there's a 53 Corvette. It's a cutaway, cutaway Corvette showing half the car's, inner workings and half of the outer body shell. See, there's a Crosley Hotshot, and there's the world's first fiberglass car, the Stout Y46. And those cars are going to change over time. We're already talking to two people that have two very, very significant Jaguar XK120s that were race prepped that are probably going to come in maybe the end of this year or so and be on exhibit where the MG is to talk about the Jaguar impact. Again, going back to it, it was the challenge of it. It was the challenge, and yes, the learning. I mean, I didn't know every single detail of Corvette history. I still don't. I still read books on Corvette history and learn something new every day. You got to remember, Corvette's one of the longest running cars there currently are. I mean, we're 68 years into production, with only 1 year not actually having a production version that went out to the public. There are a ton of stories. There are tons of information that not even probably the most savviest Corvette historian knows. And I'm not saying that to challenge anyone. I'm just saying that to, say that we all learn different aspects of history and interpret them in certain ways. That's the thing with history. It's interpreted. Unless you lived it, unless you were there, unless you're Zoroarkis Duntov, or one of the guys that worked right next to him, or if you're, Taj Jukter, the current chief engineer, all the stories from behind the scenes don't get told. That's part of the job of being a curator and a historian, is trying to find them. We'll probably never know all of them. Did I rant there long enough?
You talked long enough for me to pull up a picture of that 1951 Buick LeSabre and, kind of show that. I should try to find a cross photo, but looking at it through this photo, it's got the sloping ish trunk lid. It's got the coves in the side. I mean, there are a lot of the Corvette styling cues in it.
Well, and the biggest thing to notice on the LeSabre and the Buick XP 300, this is the famed Harley Earl wraparound windshield, and only the LeSabre and XP 300 concept cars, dream cars, had the wraparound windshield. The first production automobile to come out of GM with that is the Corvette. So, right there, you also have that cue of the wraparound windshield.
I was trying to think of the XP 300. I think I saw that car up at the Meadowbrook concours, and I think I almost saw it get hit by a falling tree. So
sounds about right. Yeah, and that car is at the Alfred P. Sloan Museum in Flint, Michigan. Actually, when I did my internship there, I had a chance to work a little bit on the car and actually got to ride in it. That was pretty awesome.
At some point here, we'll get a picture of it up here. We're doing some testing on the streaming, etc. But just for those audio listeners is wondering what some of these odd things are. But we'll just stop sharing the screen and we'll get back to our audio podcast. That's what we do.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, this question about jobs and things like that, John. Because actually, on my drive back from Ohio on Sunday, it's about an 8-hour drive with 2 kids that are under 2 years old. It's about a 10 to 11-hour drive, so you get a lot of time to think. The kids fall asleep, the wife falls asleep in the passenger seat. You can't fall asleep because you're driving; that'd be bad. Cruise control only works so much. That's.
Talk to my ex-wife about me sleeping and driving. I used to do it all the time.
I don't. But it gave me time to think, and I don't know, my mind wanders, and people, I guess there's been a few times during my, being introduced at some, conference or something where, somebody gives my bio an introduction and says something about turning, a hobby into a career. And, that whole old saying that if you turn a hobby into a career, you never work a day in your life, things like that. I don't like that one. I don't. I actually think if you turn a hobby into a job, it almost ruins your hobby. Somebody gives my bio. It's just, you do it every day at work. You don't want to come home and do it again. And my job is quite a bit different from my hobby of working on cars. I mean, even the conservation world is quite a bit different. Yes. Did I work on cars and get them running at jobs I've had? Yes, I have, because I have the knowledge and the skill to do that. But it's not what I do every day in and out. And I don't come home and go, oh God, I don't want to touch a car. I do a lot of history. I do a lot of other treatment type work on conservation, things like that. But I guess rather to me, one of the things I got thinking about, and I think there's versions of this, but I think you have to, and not everybody. I'm not saying that this is for everyone, but I think for me, it's turning a passion into a profession, because that passion for me, my passion of automotive history and transportation history in general, brings a certain drive to my profession and wanting to be the most professional person I can be in my career, because it's something I'm so passionate about, and things like that. So even in that, I think it was part of the decision to come to the Corvette Museum, even though maybe it's not exactly what my hobby is at home, which is antique cars. And yes, I mean, my knowledge base is heavily laid in the antique cars, but it's also just automotive history in general is a passion, and it's part of my profession and career. It's what drives me. It's what makes me keep moving.
Yeah, see, I do the same thing, and that's why I kind of went with that question to you. Is a lot of people know I'm into a lot of things. I've talked about it quite often on the shows. I have a passion for cars, and it paid the bills literally from the time I was about 23 till I left the museum when I was 47. And pretty much worked in cars exclusively for those 25 years or so. I enjoyed it. I did get burnt out on it, and that was making my hobby my job. And you've done a nice job of keeping your, while you're still working on cars, you're working on different cars than what you go home to. And that is a completely different world. But when I got to the museum, I was a Lotus guy and absolutely everything Lotus. And I mean, I had walls in my house in Virginia painted, green and gold that were color matched to the, Lotus logos and things like that, to the point now that I'm selling off a lot of my Lotus collection. I'm just burnt out on it. I'm finally, after 3 years of being out of the museum, beginning to enjoy cars again, and that's why that CRX I talked about earlier was potentially a contender for coming back in, because it's not a huge expense in that. But with, cigars, I enjoyed cigars, but I wanted to know more, so I picked that up as a career, because there's no way you can learn more about cigars than to do that. And, podcasting, it's a fun hobby and all of that. And I realize I fall prey to gear acquisition and that. And now it's become my job. So I'm definitely guilty, and a prime example of what you say, don't do your hobby for a living. But I've had a pretty good time at it. And, I find it a great way to get paid to learn about your hobby. It's just unfortunate at some point. And I began to realize this because in about 2007, I got out of car restoration for a year. And that's when I, went and did the Titanic stuff and the Saturn V stuff, and went into museum conservation. And it slid me into a museum position back into cars. And I thought taking a year off, I was fine. Well, guess what? 10 years later, I was wrong. It's that thirst for knowledge. And I think, you and I are kind of known as the academics on the show. That's not an insult to Will or Sean. We just kind of get a little bit more dry and academic and teaching, or whatever you want to call professorish in our conversations. I think we've gotten better about lightening them up. But it's just, you and I both, we're completely different people, but we both have that same intrinsic thing of enjoying history and enjoying thirst for knowledge. And like I said, I'm finally having fun. I made a post on Facebook the other day that a friend of mine posted a picture of a Ferrari, and I had no clue what it was. And I had to go to Ferrari's website because it's a current model, and it was the SF90. I was aware of the Rosa, hadn't seen a picture of one, and I was aware of the 812. But other than that, anything in Ferrari's lineup, that's how far away from cars I've gotten in the last couple of years. And I said to myself, do I really need to be doing a car podcast? Once I, realized that, and the day before, I had 3 consecutive years on the same day of posting where this sounds bad. There was ex-girlfriend autocrossing. The following year I was rally crossing, and then the following year I put a different ex-girlfriend into a race car for the first time. So I was at a racetrack 3 years in a row, and same thing. And a really good friend of mine, she started her racing hobby that same day, and she's still avidly racing. Really nice girl. I would like to get her on the podcast at some point. And then I'm sitting there the following day, and I'm not into cars, but I'm finding my way back, and this podcast does help me relive some of that and have fun with it because it gets to be done on my own terms. I don't know where we're going with that, but definitely knowledge and learning, etc., and enjoying.
Well, I mean, I still think the greatest question in transportation and the greatest conundrum in transportation history is not a question of where the swallow grips the coconut, but rather the fact that it is a simple question of weight ratios.
Yeah, see, we talked about academics in my last little diatribe. I don't want to think that hard. I'm sitting here.
But we also talked about making it light.
Yes.
And obviously you're not getting the movie reference.
No. Can we still watch the movie, or is it
I believe so. Yes. But I believe it's the opening scene from Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail.
There you go. I'm not British humor. I've never been able to watch Monty Python. I've never been able to. About the only British show that I've ever been able really to do was Doctor Who, and that was probably more for Rose Tyler than anything else. So,
see, and the only Doctor Who series I've been able to, or a run of the Doctor Who series that I've been able to watch, was the David Tennant years.
Yeah, see, well, the David Tennant, I can't remember. I think he was with Rose. I can't remember.
Yeah, Rose was in those. Yep.
And I will also say Amy Pond, because I have a thing for
Amy
redheads,
there, yep.
And that's Zara's a redhead, but for some reason I have a thing for redheads and the kind of the fantasies, probably that dyed blonde hair girl. I
was gonna say, wasn't Rose the blonde though?
Yeah, she was I can't think of what her real name was. I can't think of what either one of them's real name was. But and I can't keep the doctor straight because I'm more interested in the sidekicks.
And I mean, here's the thing, even Doctor Who, I mean, it's transportation related because you got to figure out how he gets that telephone booth through all that space travel and time travel.
Well, it's the TARDIS. It does wonderful things.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember. Yeah, well, seeing I'm not as big. TARDIS stood for something.
I can't remember that. But I'm
going to look it up.
Let's say I have this thing in front of me called the internet. And a lot of our listeners are probably going, we don't give a dang. Or
time. So it that's exactly what I thought. It relates to the way it travels, time and relative dimensions in space.
Sorry, I went somewhere else. Podcast I'm beginning to produce. I'm thinking there could be a twist on that for the name of that podcast. But
look at that. No TARDIS gloves coming soon.
Yeah. Time and relative dimensions in the automotive. Well,
I think we've bored them enough.
Yeah, I know. We're here sitting, we've exited cars and now we're talking about police call boxes, time traveling.
Well, I mean, it's all relative because, space travel is more in-depth. Space travel is coming. There's already a Tesla out in space driving around.
Yep.
So, this is all relative.
With the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in the glove box. So long as they gave him a towel, we should be good.
Actually, the question is, I read, I think just this evening, that NASA picked up a radio signal from deeper in space than they ever have in the last week or so. Anybody checked how far that Tesla has gotten out into space and if the radio signal is coming back?
I was hearing that Tesla was actually in pretty rough shape in space, but but this is No Driving Gloves and it's a transportation podcast, but unfortunately, a lot of times when we get out there, we start talking about Teslas. So, and I was going to start talking about rockets, but guess what? That's Musk too. So, because, I think that's why Jeff's retiring, so as he can help catch up with good old Elon in the Amazon Tesla space race there. I think, we'll go ahead and call this one good, because we're literally out there. And I could go on because of some of the stuff I've heard on Mike Rowe lately and that about the Hubble Space Telescope and photographs and time travel. And
I've got one kicking around in my head that I got to get out, though, John. You just talked about Amazon and space, and I got to believe if anybody out there watched Mystery Science Theater 3000, MST3K as we called it, I'm pretty sure there had to have been one where they riffed a B movie called Amazonians in Space or something like that, right?
I honestly believe they did, because I actually watched it when it was Mystery Science Theater 3000. We weren't, when I was young, we didn't use acronyms. But let's see here. MST.
Well, I watched it as both. I watched it as Mystery Science Theater 3000. Then, of course, they changed it to MST3K. Yeah. I've also been and seen one of the live shows. And let me tell you what, those are awesome. But I'm pretty sure there was one that was like Amazons and Amazonians and something like that. The Amazons in Space.
Manhunt in Space. Prince of Space. Space Mutiny. I don't see the Amazon one. Stranded in Space. Teenagers from Outer Space.
At least it at least sounds like something that could be on Mystery Science Theater 3000. And if it happens, I want them to riff it.
Well, there's wonder why nobody's doing that with YouTube videos. Maybe they are. I don't search for that on YouTube.
I think it's called Tosh.0, isn't it? Isn't that what Daniel Tosh does?
Tosh just rips on YouTube videos. I'm talking somebody do the YouTube channel like MST3K.
Do it actually just like MST.
I'll be honest,
okay.
My dad and I used to sit around, especially my dad, when I was knee-high to his grasshopper, as they would say, and he would make the jokes and the stupid things. And I do that when I'm watching TV with Zara, and Zara yells at me all the time, and I have to suspend reality when I'm watching TV, and I don't do that very well.
Yeah.
Reality used to be a friend of mine, but I still live in reality. So let's call this one good. Let's hope we still have some listeners that I can say go to the website, nodrivinggloves.com. Take the survey, $25 Amazon gift card. This is through the end of March 2021 that it's available. We've got some feedback because we're late with this week's episode that we're recording now, and the episode that was supposed to come out yesterday still is not out. We're already violating some of our suggestions, but this is No Driving Gloves. We do it our way. If you really want it weekly, buy us a few coffees and we'll listen to you.
Ouch.
No offense to those that have pushed for it weekly. We're really working on getting that schedule, and as soon as I get through this 3 weeks, I will have a life back, and I will have a schedule that I can abide by. Promises. Unless, of course, I get a CRX I have to put back together. But with that, Derek's been great chatting with you tonight. Been great having you guys listen tonight. NoDrivingGloves.com. Talk to you later.
See you guys later.